Cash Out had a couple hits, and then he fell out of the spotlight, and nobody knew what happened to him. But then, the news broke that he had been pimping out his own mother. And this is the crazy story behind why he's serving a life sentence in prison on a trafficking RICO. Cash Out said he was leaving the streets behind after he popped off in the rap game back in the early 2010s. But then he fell off even faster than he blew up and had to find another way to get his bread up. But instead of staying legit, Cash Out started a whole trafficking ring with his cousin and his own mom. Cash Out had one hit in 2012, and he was already back in the streets a year later, and that's where the cops said the RICO case started. Cash Out formed his own label, Pyrex Music Group, aka PMG, but instead of signing artists, Cash Out was using it as a front to kidnap women and force them into sex work. Cash Out was also making money off of OnlyFans with a woman named Boots. They were posting their tapes on OnlyFans, but Boots wasn't the only woman Cash Out was making money with. Cash Out allegedly hooked up with a bunch of women and posted the videos on OnlyFans, but it turned out some of them had been kidnapped and held hostage, and Cash Out was putting hands on them too. Cash Out, his mom Linda Smith, aka Mama Cash, and Cash Out's cousin Tyrone Taylor were all named in the RICO indictment. According to the cops, they were using the PMG label to make women think they were gonna get a shot in the rap game. But instead, the women were forced into getting pimped out. Cash Out's own mom was getting pimped too, and she was also helping bring in the other women. Pimping doesn't usually carry big sentences, but the RICO is what made the situation way worse for Cash Out. If he was just pimping by himself, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. But since he had his family helping him out, and they were using the record label too, the cops took the case way more seriously. Cash Out got hit with some crazy charges, trafficking, and way more. He was only facing 12 months on the pimping charge, but the rape and trafficking charges had sentences that were 30 and 20 years. A year before the case went to trial, Cash Out was offered a plea deal for 64 years and 150 years of probation. Taking 64 years is basically a life sentence, so Cash Out turned it down and decided to take it to trial. Then a couple months before the trial date, they offered Cash Out another plea deal for 25 years. He knew he was facing life in prison if the trial didn't go his way, and Cash Out could have made it out earlier on good behavior since it was a state RICO and not a federal case, but he still turned it down and decided to try and beat the case in court. That turned out to be a huge fumble, because Cash Out was cooked after the witness started taking the stand. A lot of blogs and YouTubers were saying Cash Out got a life sentence just for pimping, but the real story is way crazier. Cash Out wasn't just pimping and making sex tapes. He was kidnapping homeless women off the street and forcing them to become prostitutes just so they could eat. One woman met Cash Out while she was outside a gas station. Cash Out told her he could help her make some money, so she got in his whip and had no idea what was about to happen. Cash Out took her to a house and raped her, then locked her inside and started pimping her out. The woman couldn't leave the house, and the only time she even got food was when she earned money for Cash Out. Another witness took the stand and said Cash Out had trafficked her cousin and was forcing her to be a. The witness's cousin said Cash Out was pimping her out, then taking all the money that the clients were giving her. One of the victims testified that Cash Out made it sound like he wanted to date her at first, but then he started pimping her out. Cash Out's ex-girlfriend also took the stand and said she helped collect the money from the women Cash Out was pimping. What's even crazier about the case is that Cash Out's mom was involved with everything too. Mama Cash was recruiting women to pimp out, handling a lot of the payments, and was even selling her own body, even though she's in her 50s. Mama Cash was hitting up women on Instagram and turning them into too. One victim wanted to become a model and thought Mama Cash was gonna give her a modeling job. But then Mama Cash said the real job was sex work. The woman and her friend actually agreed to work for Mama Cash's. But then Mama Cash set him up to get raped and robbed by 3 dudes at a motel. Cash Out, his cousin Tyrone Taylor, and his mom were all convicted at the end of the trial. Before he was sentenced, Cash Out made a statement to the judge and said he didn't do anything wrong and even compared himself to Jesus.
You know you can be falsely accused of things. Jesus was falsely accused. A lot of the prophets were falsely accused. You don't have that emotion like you've done something. You know, so if you see me with my head high or if you see me smiling, it's because I know at the end of the day, through Jesus Christ, the Most High will always give you the actual judgment.
Cash Out said all the women he pimped out wanted to do it and that he never raped anybody, but the judge wasn't hearing it. Cash Out got hit with a life sentence plus 70 years in prison on the rape and RICO charges. His cousin also got hit with life plus 60 years, and Mama Cash got off easier with a 20-year sentence for the RICO and trafficking charges. Rumors say that Cash Out's mom was the one who got him into pimping and trafficking. Cash Out came up in the streets, and in 2009, he beat a gun charge and decided to switch up how he was moving. He hopped in the booth and started rapping, and not before long, he had a deal with a little indie label called Bases Loaded. Cash Out's first single was a track called Cashin' Out, and when L.A. Reid heard the track, he set up a meeting and gave him a deal with Epic Records. Cashin' Out was already buzzing, but then they re-released it on Epic Records, and it really popped off. Cashin' Out was all over the charts, and a bunch of rappers like Chief Keef, Yo Gotti, and Young Jeezy started dropping remixes. Cash Out was on the same label as Future, and in 2013, they dropped a track Another Country together. 2014 was the last year Cash Out had any movement in the rap game. He popped off a little with the track She Twerkin' and dropped an album that year, but then he fell off completely. He dropped a couple mixtapes in 2015 and 2017 that didn't make any noise, but by that time, Cash Out was already trafficking women and kidnapping them. One woman met Cash Out's cousin Tyrone Taylor and asked him if he can give her money for the bus. The woman was homeless, and Tyrone told her he could help her get a place to live. Then he took her to a motel to rape her and start pimping her out. After the trial was over and Cash Out got hit with a life sentence, some people were trying to tie it into the Young Thug RICO situation. The RICO against Thug and his YSL crew fell apart, and Thug walked free because the prosecution fumbled the trial completely. Fannie Willis is the district attorney in Atlanta, and she was getting a lot of heat for what happened in the Thug case. So some people think the judge hit Cash Out with a life sentence because they wanted to make an example out of him. Cash Out's case was way different from Thug's though. The prosecutors didn't have a lot of evidence that proved Thug was actually involved in anything. But Cash Out, he was really beating women, holding them hostage, and starving them if they weren't making the money. Cash Out, his cousin Tyrone, and Mama Cash all got found guilty and sentenced. But there were two other people caught up in the case as well. Cash Out's manager, Demetrius Edwards, aka Drama, and Kiera Danielle Adams, aka Boots. It's not clear what's going on with their charges, but there's a good chance they're gonna go down for decades, just like the rest of them.